You turn up the thermostat without thinking. A number ticks up on a screen, and within minutes, the room warms around you. It feels almost too easy. But the real story of how humans survived winter is far stranger than any dial on a wall. For most of human history, there was no dial. There was no wall half the time. Just cold. Real cold. The kind that kills within hours if you make one wrong decision. So how did a species built for the African savanna end up thriving in places where the air itself could freeze the moisture in your lungs? Start with the obvious problem. Your body evolved in heat. Your skin has almost no fur left. Your sweat glands are built to cool you down, not warm you up. In a strict biological sense, you are a tropical animal. And yet somehow, tropical animals built villages inside the Arctic Circle. That gap between what your body was built for and where your ancestors actually lived is the whole mystery. The first real weapon against cold wasn't fire, it was clothing, and not the kind you're picturing. Early humans didn't just drape hides over their shoulders. Archaeologist Ian Gilligan has argued that tailored, fitted clothing marks one of the true turning points in human survival. Loose hides let cold air circulate underneath. Fitted clothing traps a thin layer of warm air against the skin, and that thin layer does more work than people realize. Bone needles found at sites in Russia and Siberia, dated to more than 40,000 years ago, show holes fine enough for sinew thread. Someone was stitching seams that actually sealed against the wind. That needle may have been as important to surviving winter as any weapon was to surviving a predator. Then came fire, and fire changed everything about how humans experienced the night. Before controlled fire, darkness and cold arrived together, and there was little to do but wait them out. Evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa suggests humans were controlling fire at least 1,000,000 years ago. But controlling fire in a warm cave is one thing. Keeping a fire burning through an ice age blizzard, using it to dry wet clothing, to cook fat-rich meat that your body actually needed to survive extreme cold, was another skill entirely. And you needed that fat. Here's something most people never think about. In a warm climate, your body can survive comfortably on lean meat and plants. In deep cold, lean meat alone can kill you. It's a real, documented condition sometimes called rabbit starvation, where a body fed only lean protein in freezing conditions starts to break down from the inside, unable to process the excess protein without enough fat or carbohydrate alongside it. Ancient hunters in cold regions understood this instinctively, long before anyone had a word for metabolism. They prized fatty organs, marrow, and blubber above the leanest cuts. Choosing the fattiest parts of an animal wasn't a preference. In winter, it was the difference between living and dying. Shelter mattered just as much as clothing or food. And shelter in the deep past didn't always mean a cave. Caves are rare and not always positioned near food or water. So people built their own. At sites like Mezerich in Ukraine, archaeologists uncovered dwellings built from the bones of mammoths. Dozens of skulls and tusks stacked and arranged as a frame, likely covered in hides to block the wind. Building a house out of an animal that could crush you is not an obvious idea. It suggests planning across seasons, not just survival in the moment. Location itself became a kind of technology. Groups didn't just endure winter wherever they happened to be standing when the temperature dropped. They moved to it, deliberately, seeking valleys that blocked wind, south-facing slopes that caught more sun, or coastlines where the ocean itself moderated the worst of the cold. Reading landscape like this, knowing which slope would be 5 degrees warmer at dusk, was knowledge passed down and refined over countless winters. The kind of expertise no single person could have discovered alone. Humans weren't the only ones facing this problem either. Neanderthals lived through repeated ice ages across Europe for hundreds of thousands of years before modern humans ever arrived there. Paleoanthropologist Jean-Jacques Hublin has studied how Neanderthal bodies themselves adapted to extreme cold, with shorter limbs and stockier builds that conserved heat more efficiently than the taller, leaner frames typical in warmer climates. But biology alone wasn't enough. Neanderthal sites show hearths reused across many generations, evidence of layered clothing, and tools built specifically for scraping hides clean enough to wear against the skin without rotting. When modern humans eventually moved into the same freezing landscapes, they weren't just surviving the cold from scratch. They were arriving in a world where another species had already spent hundreds of thousands of years learning its lessons, some of which may have been passed along through contact rather than reinvented alone. There's also a quieter kind of survival tool that rarely gets credit: Each other. Anthropologist Sarah Blaffer Hrdy has written extensively about how human cooperation, shared childcare, and food distribution across a group set our species apart from other primates. In brutal cold, that cooperation wasn't just kindness, it was infrastructure. A person who fell ill during a blizzard needed someone to keep the fire going, someone to share a sleeping space and body heat, someone to hunt on their behalf until they recovered. Groups that shared resources during hard winters outlasted groups that didn't. Over enough generations, that kind of cooperation became instinct, not choice. None of this was guesswork happening once and getting lucky. It was trial and error repeated across thousands of winters, refined by people who had no written records to pass down what worked. A stitching technique, a fire-tending trick, a preference for fat over lean muscle. Each discovery had to be relearned, taught, and physically demonstrated generation after generation in conditions that punished any mistake immediately and permanently. And this is the part worth sitting with. Every single piece of winter survival you take for granted today, insulated clothing, dietary fat, sheltered housing, shared resources during hardship, was assembled slowly by people who had far less room for error than you do now. If they misjudged the clothing, they froze. If they misjudged the food, they starved even with a full stomach. If they misjudged shelter, the cold simply took them in their sleep. There was no thermostat to correct a mistake. There was only the next winter, arriving exactly on schedule, indifferent to whether you were ready. You still carry pieces of that inheritance, even if you never notice them. You reach for warmer, fattier food without thinking in the cold months, craving stews and roasts in December in a way you never do in July. You feel an old, wordless comfort sitting close to other people when the temperature drops, pulling a blanket over two people instead of one, without ever asking why that feels better than the cold math of body heat would suggest. You still build shelter, even if yours has drywall and insulation instead of mammoth bone and hide. You still watch a forecast the way your ancestors once watched the sky, trying to guess what the coming days will demand of you. The tools have changed beyond recognition. Thermostats replaced hearths, down jackets replaced sewn hides, grocery store fat replaced hunted marrow. But the instinct underneath all of it, to prepare before the cold arrives, to gather what your body will need, to stay close to other people when the temperature drops, is the same instinct that kept a fragile, nearly hairless, tropical species alive through an ice age it was never built to survive. You turn up the thermostat without thinking. But somewhere underneath that easy warmth is a much older decision your ancestors made every single winter, one they could never afford to get wrong.